The grand ballroom of the Transcorp Hilton in Abuja glittered like a constellation brought down to earth. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing reflections across marble floors so polished they mirrored the opulence above. White orchids imported from Thailand adorned every surface, their delicate petals releasing a fragrance that mingled with expensive perfumes worn by Nigeria's elite. Outside, a fleet of luxury vehicles lined the curved driveway: Range Rovers, Mercedes S-Classes, Bentleys, each one a testament to the wealth gathered within these walls. But Chikazi Okonkwo, Chick to those who knew him, stood at the altar and saw none of it. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his diamond-encrusted cufflinks for the third time in as many minutes. The custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo that had cost him 8 million naira suddenly felt too tight around his collar. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning that kept the massive hall at a perfect 22 degrees Celsius. "Are you all right, sir?" his best man whispered, leaning in with concern etched across his features. Chick didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the entrance, scanning each face that appeared in the ornate doorway. The pastor beside him cleared his throat, a subtle reminder that they were already running 15 minutes behind schedule. The bride, his bride, Chidera, a beauty queen 15 years his junior, waited in the bridal suite, no doubt wondering why the ceremony hadn't begun. But Chick couldn't start. Not yet. Not until she arrived. He had sent the invitation himself, personally ensuring it reached Gozi's modest apartment in the Nyanya district. He had pictured this moment 1,000 times over the past 6 months. Gozi would arrive in whatever threadbare outfit she could afford, her head bowed in shame, forced to witness his triumph. She would see what she had lost. She would understand, finally, that leaving her had been the best decision of his life. The guests were getting restless. 500 of Abuja's most influential people, politicians, oil magnates, tech entrepreneurs, Nollywood celebrities, filled the gilded chairs, their murmurs growing louder with each passing minute. Chick's mother shot him a questioning look from the front row, her heavily jeweled fingers gripping her handbag with barely contained irritation. Then it happened. A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Heads turned toward the entrance. Someone dropped a champagne glass, the crystal shattering against marble in a cascade of sharp notes that seemed to punctuate the moment. Chick's breath caught in his throat. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, the kind owned by only a handful of people in all of Nigeria, had glided to a stop directly in front of the entrance. The vehicle gleamed like obsidian under the afternoon sun, its spirit of ecstasy hood ornament catching the light. A uniformed chauffeur emerged, moving with practiced precision to open the rear passenger door. And then she stepped out. Gozi. But this wasn't the Gozi that Chick remembered. This wasn't the broken woman he had divorced 18 months ago. This wasn't the wife who had cried herself to sleep night after night, her body racked with the pain of infertility and his constant ridicule. This woman moved like royalty. She wore a flowing agbada in deep purple and gold, the fabric clearly custom-made by one of Nigeria's premier designers. The traditional attire had been modernized with elegant lines that spoke of both heritage and contemporary sophistication. Her geli, the elaborate head tie, was wrapped with such artistry that it resembled a crown. Gold jewelry adorned her neck, wrists, and ears, but it was tasteful, refined, speaking of old money rather than nouveau riche ostentation. But it wasn't her appearance that caused the collective intake of breath throughout the ballroom. It was the 3 children she held. Triplets. 3 beautiful boys, no more than 15 months old, dressed in matching white traditional outfits with tiny caps perched on their heads. They looked around with wide, curious eyes, taking in the spectacle of the wedding with innocent wonder. Gozi walked into that ballroom with her head held high, her spine straight, her expression serene. She moved with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to be proud of. The triplets were cradled carefully, one in her arms, the other 2 held by 2 elegantly dressed women who flanked her like ladies in waiting. The crowd parted for her automatically, instinctively, the way people move for someone of genuine importance. Chick felt his knees go weak. His vision tunneled. The elaborate wedding setup, the ice sculpture in the shape of interlocking hearts, the 10-tier cake that had required 3 pastry chefs working around the clock, the live band flown in from South Africa, all of it faded into meaningless background noise. Triplets. The word echoed in his mind like an accusation. The woman he had divorced because she couldn't give him children now walked through his wedding carrying 3 sons. 3 perfect, healthy boys who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Gozi's eyes found his across the sea of stunned faces. For a moment, just a moment, their gazes locked. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply looked at him with an expression that was somehow worse than contempt. It was pity. Then she gracefully took a seat in the middle section, her attendants settling the children with practiced ease. The triplets were remarkably well behaved, looking around with quiet curiosity at the spectacle surrounding them. "Sir," the pastor whispered urgently, "should we begin?" But Chick couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Because in that instant, standing at the altar of his own wedding, surrounded by everything money could buy and everyone who mattered in Nigerian high society, Chikezie Okonkwo realized something that turned his blood to ice. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. And everyone in this room was about to witness the consequences. To understand how we arrived at this moment, this collision of pride and consequence in one of Abuja's most prestigious wedding venues, we must turn back the clock. We must journey back 7 years, to a time when Chikezie Okonkwo's story with Gozi Okafor was just beginning, when love still seemed possible, and when the future held promise instead of regret. 7 years ago, Chick was not yet the billionaire mogul he would become. He was a rising entrepreneur, hungry and ambitious, building his telecommunications business from the ground up. He had money, yes, enough to be comfortable, enough to turn heads, but he hadn't yet reached the stratospheric wealth that would later define him. He met Gozi at a friend's birthday party in Lagos. She wasn't the most glamorous woman in the room. She didn't wear the tightest dress or the highest heels. She didn't throw herself at successful men the way so many women in Lagos did, angling for a come-up, a connection, a ticket to a better life. Gozi sat in a corner, engaged in animated conversation with an elderly woman, completely oblivious to the party swirling around her. She laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that seemed to light up her entire face. Something about that laugh caught Chick's attention. Something about the way she seemed completely comfortable being herself, not performing for anyone, not trying to impress. He approached her. "You're missing the party," he said, gesturing to the dance floor where bodies moved to the latest Afrobeats hit. She looked up at him with warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed confidence. "I prefer good conversation to good dancing," she replied simply. "Besides, Mama here was just telling me about her granddaughter's graduation from medical school. That's more interesting than anything happening on that dance floor." Chick was intrigued. In his world, everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. But Gozi seemed genuinely content listening to an old woman's stories. They talked that night. And the next day, they talked again. And the day after that. Gozi worked as a secondary school teacher in Surulere. She taught English literature and earned a modest salary that barely covered her rent and her contributions to her family back in Enugu. But she loved her work. She spoke about her students with such passion, such genuine care, that Chick found himself listening to stories about teenage drama and essay assignments as if they were the most fascinating things in the world. She was different. In a city full of people trying to be someone they weren't, Gozi was authentically herself. She didn't pretend to know about the business world he operated in. She didn't fake interest in the luxury brands he was beginning to afford. When he took her to expensive restaurants, she was gracious but never impressed by the price tag. She was more interested in the conversation than the venue. "You're not like other women," he told her once, early in their courtship. She had smiled at that, a slightly sad smile. "I'm exactly like other women, Chick. We all want the same things, to be seen, to be valued, to be loved for who we are, not what we can provide. The difference is, I'm not willing to pretend to be someone I'm not to get those things. He fell in love with her. Genuinely, deeply, completely. 6 months later, he proposed. Nothing extravagant. No helicopter rides or beach setups with rose petals. Just the two of them in her small apartment, him on one knee, asking her to be his wife with a ring he had saved 3 months to afford. She said yes. Their wedding was modest by Lagos standards. Held in a church hall in Surulere, attended by family and close friends. Gozi wore a simple white dress that cost less than the shoes some wedding guests wore, but she was radiant. Chick remembered looking at her that day and thinking he was the luckiest man alive. The first 2 years of marriage were happy. Chick's business was growing rapidly. He was making deals, expanding into new markets, and the money was flowing in faster than he had ever dreamed possible. They moved from Gozi's cramped apartment to a nice house in Lekki Phase 1. Nothing ostentatious, but comfortable, with space for the family they planned to build. And that's when the problems started. Gozi didn't get pregnant. At first, it wasn't a concern. They were young, healthy, and still in the honeymoon phase of marriage. But as months turned into a year, and a year turned into 2, the absence of children became the elephant in every room. Chick's mother started making comments. Subtle at first, questions about when she could expect grandchildren, pointed observations about Chick's younger cousins who were already on their second child. Then the comments became less subtle. Then they became accusations. "Something is wrong with that girl," his mother declared during one particularly tense family gathering. "Our family has never had fertility problems. It must be her." Chick defended Gozi at first. He told his mother that these things took time, that they were still young, that medical science had shown that fertility issues could come from either partner. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Gozi wanted to see doctors together, to run tests, to understand what might be causing the delay. But Chick's pride wouldn't allow it. In his mind, the problem couldn't be him. He was Chikazi Okonkwo, successful, powerful, virile. The problem had to be Gozi. As his business empire grew, so did his arrogance. The money was intoxicating. 5 million became 50 million. 50 million became 500 million. Within 3 years of their marriage, Chick had become one of the youngest billionaires in Nigeria, his telecommunications company securing government contracts that made him richer than he had ever imagined possible. With wealth came a new circle of friends. Men who collected women like trophies. Men who measured their success by the model quality of their wives and girlfriends. Men who whispered in Chick's ear that he could do better than a simple schoolteacher who couldn't even give him a child. Chick started coming home later. Started taking business trips that lasted longer than necessary. Started looking at Gozi with something that resembled disappointment. Gozi tried everything. She prayed. She fasted. She saw traditional healers and modern fertility specialists. She endured countless invasive procedures and tests. The doctors found nothing conclusively wrong, but suggested they both needed to be examined to understand the full picture. Chick refused. "I don't need tests," he told her coldly. "I know there's nothing wrong with me." The warmth that had once characterized their marriage began to freeze over. Chick stopped seeing Gozi as his partner, his companion, the woman who had loved him before the billions. Instead, she became a symbol of his only failure, his inability to produce an heir. Their intimate life became mechanical, clinical, focused solely on conception. The joy, the passion, the genuine affection that had once defined their physical relationship evaporated. Gozi was no longer his wife. She was a project that refused to show results. And then Chick met Chidera. She was everything Gozi wasn't. 23 years old to Gozi's 35. A former beauty queen with a body maintained by personal trainers and cosmetic enhancements. She wore designer clothes like armor and moved through Lagos nightlife like she owned it. She was beautiful, yes, But more importantly, she was fertile, or so she claimed. "I come from a family of twins," Chitara purred one night when they first met at an industry party. "My mother had 5 children. Her mother had 7. When you marry me, you'll have a football team of sons." It was a lie, of course. But Chick was too blinded by his own desperation to see through it. The affairs started. Discreet at first, then increasingly careless. Chick stopped trying to hide the lipstick on his collar, the perfume that wasn't Gozi's, the late nights that had nothing to do with business. Gozi knew. Of course she knew. But she loved him still, with a patience and grace that somehow made Chick angrier. He wanted her to fight, to scream, to give him an excuse to justify what he knew he was going to do anyway. Instead, she quietly absorbed each betrayal, each humiliation, praying that the man she had married was still in there somewhere, buried under the billions and the ego. The breaking point came on their 5th wedding anniversary. Gozi had planned a simple dinner at home. She cooked Chick's favorite meal, ofen sala with pounded yam, made exactly the way his mother had taught her. She wore the dress he had once said made her look like sunshine. She set the table with candles and hope. Chick didn't come home. He was at Transcorp Hilton with Chitara, celebrating his latest business deal, drinking champagne that cost more than Gozi's monthly salary used to be. When he finally stumbled home at 3 a.m., Gozi was still awake, the carefully prepared meal long cold, the candles burned down to stubs. "Where were you?" she asked quietly. "Out," he replied, not even bothering to look at her. "It's our anniversary, Chick." So. That single word, so, said everything. 5 years of marriage reduced to a dismissive shrug. "I made dinner. I waited. I don't care about dinner," he exploded, the alcohol making him cruel. "I don't care about anniversaries. You want to know what I care about? I care about having a child. Heir. Something you failed to give me for 5 years. We can see a doctor together," Gozi pleaded, her voice breaking. "Both of us. We can figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out," Chick roared. "I'm not the problem. You are. You are barren, Gozi. Barren. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise." The word hung in the air like poison. Barren. The cruelest accusation in a culture that measured a woman's worth by her fertility. Gozi's face crumpled. "Chick, please. I want a divorce." Silence. "What?" "You heard me. I want a divorce. I'm done with this charade. I'm done pretending that this marriage is anything but a failure. I'm done with you." "Don't do this," Gozi whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't do this. We can work through this. We can." "There's nothing to work through. I'm marrying Chitara. She's already pregnant." It was a lie. Chitara wasn't pregnant. But Chick knew that lie would hurt Gozi more than any truth. And it did. Gozi collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with sobs. 5 years of holding it together, of enduring his family's accusations, of weathering his infidelity, of loving him despite everything, it all came pouring out in a flood of anguish that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Chick felt nothing. Or rather, he felt something that disturbed him even more than feeling nothing. He felt relief. Relief that it was finally over. Relief that he could now pursue the life he believed he deserved, unencumbered by a wife who reminded him of his supposed failure. He left her there, crying on the floor of the home they had shared, and didn't look back. The divorce proceedings were brutal and swift. Chick, with his army of expensive lawyers and unlimited resources, made sure of that. In Nigeria's legal system, where money often determined justice more than facts, Gozi never stood a chance. She couldn't afford legal representation that could match Chick's. The lawyer she managed to scrape together funds for was overworked and outmatched, going up against a team of legal sharks who had built their careers on protecting the interests of the ultra-wealthy. Chick could have been generous. He could have provided for Gozi, ensured she was taken care of, given her a portion of the wealth they had built together, even though most of it had come during their marriage, while she had supported him, believed in him, stood by him through the early struggles. Instead, he was vindictive. His lawyers argued that Gozi had contributed nothing to his business success. They painted her as a gold digger who had married him for money, conveniently ignoring the fact that he'd had very little money when they married. They claimed she had failed in her primary duty as a wife by not producing children, using language that made Gozi flinch every time it was read in court. The judge, a stern-faced man who seemed more interested in finishing before his lunch break than in actual justice, barely glanced at Gozi's lawyers' arguments. The whole proceeding felt like a formality, a rubber stamp on a foregone conclusion. Gozi was awarded nothing. Not the house. Not a portion of the business. Not even adequate alimony. The judge granted her a token payment of 2 million naira, a sum that might sound substantial to some, but was less than what Chick spent on a single watch. The court finds that the marriage failed due to irreconcilable differences, primarily the respondent's inability to fulfill marital obligations, the judge droned, not even looking at Gozi as he destroyed her life with bureaucratic efficiency. The petitioner is granted full rights to all marital assets, as the respondent failed to demonstrate any significant contribution to the accumulation of said assets. Gozi sat in that courtroom, wearing the same dress she'd worn to 3 previous hearings because it was the only formal outfit she owned, and felt herself break in ways that couldn't be measured or seen. She walked out of that courthouse with nothing but a small suitcase of personal belongings and a certified check for 2 million naira, money that would barely cover 3 months of rent in a decent apartment. Chick's friends and family celebrated. His mother threw a party, literally, to celebrate the divorce being finalized. "Now my son can marry a proper woman," she told anyone who would listen, "and give me grandchildren." The society pages of Nigerian blogs and newspapers picked up the story. "Billionaire telecommunication mogul divorces barren wife," the headline screamed. They published unflattering photos of Gozi leaving the courthouse, her eyes red from crying, her modest dress wrinkled. Beside these images, they placed glamorous photos of Chidera, bikini shots from her beauty pageant days, pictures of her at exclusive parties, images that sold the narrative Chick wanted, out with the old failure, in with the new promise. The think pieces came next. Social media erupted with opinions. Some defended Gozi, calling out the cruelty of divorcing someone for infertility. But many, too many, sided with Chick. "A man needs an heir," they argued. "What's the point of wealth if you have no one to leave it to?" She should have agreed to let him take a second wife. 5 years and no child? Something must be wrong with her. The cruelty of public opinion was its own kind of violence. Gozi retreated from the world. She moved into a single room in a shared apartment in Nyanya, one of Abuja's less affluent neighborhoods. The apartment was a far cry from the Lekki house she'd left behind. The walls were thin, the plumbing temperamental, and the neighborhood alive with sounds that never stopped, day or night. She couldn't return to teaching. The scandal had followed her, and schools didn't want the notoriety. Parents whispered when they saw her. Her former colleagues, some of whom had been friends, distanced themselves. In Nigerian society, divorce carried a stigma, especially for women, and especially when the narrative painted you as the problem. Depression settled over her like a heavy blanket. Days blurred together. She stopped eating regularly, stopped caring about her appearance, stopped seeing the point in much of anything. The 2 million naira dwindled quickly. Rent, food, medicine for the chronic headaches that had developed from stress, transport costs to endless job interviews that led nowhere. Within 4 months, she was down to her last 200,000 naira. Meanwhile, Chick's life gleamed with renewed brilliance. He and Chidera were everywhere. Industry events, society weddings, exclusive parties. The blogs tracked their every move. Nigeria's hottest new couple, one magazine declared, featuring a 10-page spread of them in designer outfits, lounging in Chick's newly renovated 15-bedroom mansion in Asokoro. Chitara moved through her new life with the confidence of someone who had always known she'd end up here. She redecorated Chick's house, erasing every trace of Gozi. She hired a personal stylist, a nutritionist, a fitness trainer. She became Instagram famous, her feed a carefully curated display of luxury, handbag collections, private jet trips, champagne brunches. Chick ate it up. This was the life he had envisioned. A beautiful woman on his arm who looked good in photographs. Friends who envied him. A narrative that painted him as a man who had overcome a bad situation and emerged victorious. But there was a problem. Chitara wasn't getting pregnant. At first, it wasn't a concern. They'd only been together officially for 6 months, engaged for 3. These things took time. But Chick couldn't help noticing the irony. The creeping worry that began as a whisper in the back of his mind. What if? No. He pushed the thought away. It wasn't him. It couldn't be him. Chitara had promised him she was fertile. She came from a family of twins, she'd said. He'd never bothered to verify that claim. As month after month passed with no pregnancy, Chick became increasingly agitated. He started dropping hints to Chitara about seeing a fertility specialist. She deflected with practiced ease. They were too stressed, too busy. She was planning to lose a few more kilos first. The timing wasn't quite right. What Chick didn't know was that Chitara was secretly on birth control. She had no intention of getting pregnant anytime soon, if ever. Pregnancy would ruin her figure, her lifestyle, her freedom. She liked being Chick's fiancée, the glamour, the attention, the money. A child would complicate everything. Besides, she was only 23. She had time. Or so she told herself. But Chick was growing impatient. The wedding was set for 6 months away. He needed to see results. He needed proof that the problem had truly been Gozi, not him. One night, after a particularly lavish party where several of his friends had shown off their young children, Chick confronted Chitara. "We need to see a doctor," he said, his voice tight. "Why?" Chitara replied, barely looking up from her phone where she was editing her Instagram posts. "Because we've been trying for months and nothing is happening." "We haven't been trying that hard," she said dismissively. "We're always traveling, always busy. These things take time, Chick. It's been 7 months. So, some couples take years." The casualness in her voice ignited something in Chick. "I don't have years. I need a child. Soon." Chitara finally looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that unsettled her. This wasn't just impatience. This was desperation. This was a man terrified of confronting a truth about himself. "We'll make an appointment," she said soothingly, knowing full well she would keep finding excuses to postpone it. But Chick's anxiety only grew. At night, alone with his thoughts, he couldn't escape the question that haunted him. What if Gozi hadn't been the problem? He told himself it was impossible. He refused to even entertain the thought. Instead, he channeled his anxiety into planning the most extravagant wedding Nigeria had ever seen. If he couldn't prove his virility with a child, he'd prove his status with a spectacle. That's when he had the idea. An idea so petty, so cruel, so perfectly designed to salve his wounded pride that it felt like genius to his ego-drunk mind. He would invite Gozi to the wedding. "Absolutely not," Chitara said when he first mentioned it. "Why would you want your ex-wife at our wedding?" "To show her what she lost," Chick replied simply. But it was more than that, and somewhere in the darkest corner of his conscience, Chick knew it. It was about humiliation. It was about revenge for the doubt she'd planted in his mind simply by existing. It was about proving to himself, to his family, to Nigerian society that he had been right to leave her. He pictured Gozi arriving in whatever modest clothing she could afford, seeing the opulence, seeing Chitara in her designer wedding dress, seeing him surrounded by wealth and power and beauty. He imagined the look on her face, the envy, the regret, the recognition of everything she'd lost by failing to give him what he needed. It would be the final punctuation mark on their failed marriage. The ultimate proof that he had won. Against Chitara's protests, he had the invitation hand-delivered to Gozi's apartment in Nyanya. He made sure it was one of the expensive embossed ones, the kind that cost 50,000 naira each, dripping with gold leaf and elaborate calligraphy. The invitation came in a luxury box, the kind usually reserved for his most important business associates and political connections. The messenger who delivered it reported back to Chick that Gozi had accepted the invitation quietly, without reaction, and simply closed the door. Perfect, Chick thought. She's too ashamed to even respond. The wedding would be her final humiliation. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was what Gozi's life had become in the months since their divorce. He knew nothing of the transformation that had occurred, invisible to him in his bubble of wealth and self-satisfaction. And so, confident in his plan, Chick moved forward with wedding preparations, never suspecting that he was orchestrating not Gozi's humiliation, but his own. Let us rewind to 8 months before that fateful wedding day. Let us return to the darkest moment of Gozi's life, because it is in darkness that some transformations begin. Gozi sat on the edge of her narrow bed in her Nyanya apartment, holding a bottle of sleeping pills. Not because she intended to take them all. Not because she had given up completely on life. But because she needed to know they were there. That if the pain became too much, if the weight of failure and public humiliation and crushing loneliness became unbearable, she had an escape route. It was 3 a.m. The sounds of the neighborhood, barking dogs, a couple arguing next door, the endless traffic on the main road, formed a symphony of urban chaos that matched the chaos in her mind. She had 87,000 naira left to her name. Enough for maybe one more month of rent and food, if she was very, very careful. No job prospects. No family willing to take her in. They'd made it clear they were ashamed of her failure to keep her wealthy husband. No friends, because poverty has a way of revealing who your real friends are, and Gozi had learned that most of hers had valued proximity to Chick's wealth more than loyalty to her. She was 36 years old. Divorced. Publicly labeled as barren. Broke. Alone. In that moment, sitting in the darkness of her small room, Gozi prayed. Not the desperate bargaining prayers she'd offered during her marriage. Please let me get pregnant. Please fix this. Please make Chick love me again. This was different. This was surrender. God, she whispered into the darkness, I don't understand why this is happening. I don't understand what I did to deserve this. But I'm letting go. I'm releasing this pain. I'm releasing Chick. I'm releasing the life I thought I would have. Show me what's next. Please, just show me what's next. The answer came in the most unexpected way. The next morning, there was a knock on her door. Gozi opened it to find her neighbor, Mrs. Adebayo, a widow in her 60s who sold vegetables at the local market. Good morning, Sister Gozi, Mrs. Adebayo said warmly. I'm making akara this morning. Come eat with me. You're too thin. It was such a simple gesture. An invitation to share fried bean cakes. But to Gozi, emotionally starved and socially isolated, it was everything. Over breakfast, Mrs. Adebayo didn't ask about the divorce. Didn't offer platitudes. Didn't judge. She simply talked about her vegetables, about her grandchildren, about the price of tomatoes, about life. You know, Mrs. Adebayo said casually, dipping her akara in pap, I was where you are once. Different circumstances, but the same darkness. My husband died and left me with nothing but debts. I had 3 small children. I thought my life was over. Gozi looked up, surprised. Mrs. Adebayo always seemed so content, so at peace. What did you do? Gozi asked. I started small. Very small. I bought tomatoes from a farmer and resold them at the market. 5 tomatoes at a time. Made maybe 20 naira profit per day. But it was something. And something is always better than nothing. The conversation stayed with Gozi. That afternoon, instead of lying in bed staring at the ceiling as had become her routine, she walked through the neighborhood. Really walked, paying attention. She noticed how many people bought food from street vendors. She noticed the lunch rush, workers from nearby offices desperate for quick, affordable meals. She noticed a gap. There were plenty of vendors selling rice and stew, but no one was selling the kind of homemade, traditional soups her mother had taught her to make. An idea began to form. With her last 87,000 naira, Gozi made a decision that seemed crazy even to her. She would start a food business. Not a restaurant. Nothing that required overhead or permits or equipment she couldn't afford. Just home-cooked meals, made with care, sold to office workers during lunch. She spent 50,000 naira on ingredients: stockfish, uziza leaves, palm oil, yam, vegetables, spices. She spent another 15,000 on simple takeaway containers. The remaining money would cover transport and the next month's rent. On her first day, she made 20 portions of oaf and sala. She packed them carefully, added portions of pounded yam, and walked to the nearest office complex during lunch break. "Fresh homemade soup," she called out, her voice shaky with nervousness. "Made this morning. Just like your mother makes it." She sold 3 portions that first day. 3. She went home with 2,700 naira in her pocket and 17 unsold portions that would spoil by tomorrow. It would have been easy to give up, to say she had tried and failed. But something had shifted in Gozi. Maybe it was prayer. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was the simple act of trying something, anything, instead of drowning in despair. The next day, she went back. Sold 5 portions. The day after that, 8. Word spread slowly but steadily. Office workers, tired of the same roadside rice and beans, began to look forward to the soup lady. They appreciated the quality, the care, the taste of home in the middle of a workday. Within a month, Gozi had a regular customer base. She was making 15,000 naira per week in profit. Not a fortune, but enough to eat, pay rent, and save a little. More importantly, she had a purpose. A reason to wake up. An identity beyond Chick's failed ex-wife. But the real transformation was still to come. One day, about 2 months into her food business, a woman in an expensive car pulled up as Gozi was selling her lunch portions. "You're Gozi, aren't you?" the woman said, rolling down her tinted window. "Chikazi's ex-wife?" Gozi's stomach clenched. She braced herself for mockery or pity, the two responses she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, the woman said, "I'm Dr. Amara Nwosu. I'm a fertility specialist. I read about your case in the news. I'd like to talk to you." Gozi's first instinct was to refuse. She'd had enough of doctors, enough of tests, enough of hope that led nowhere. "Please," Dr. Amara said gently. "Just a conversation. No charge. No obligation. Just 2 women talking." Against her better judgment, Gozi agreed. Dr. Amara took her to a small cafe, ordered them both lunch, and said something that would change everything. "I believe you were misdiagnosed. Or rather, not diagnosed at all." "What do you mean?" Gozi asked. "The reports I saw from your previous doctors, they weren't comprehensive. They ran basic tests, found nothing obviously wrong, and that was that. But infertility is complex. There are dozens of factors that don't show up in standard screenings." "I can't afford extensive testing," Gozi said quietly. "I can barely afford to eat." "I'm not asking you to pay," Dr. Amara replied. "I'm offering to help because I see cases like yours all the time. Women blamed for infertility when the real issues are never properly investigated. Let me run a full diagnostic panel. Pro bono. If I'm wrong, you've lost nothing but a few hours. If I'm right, you deserve to know the truth." Gozi felt tears sting her eyes. Why would you do this for me? Dr. Amara's expression softened. Because I was married to a man like Chick once. He blamed me for our lack of children. Publicly humiliated me. Divorced me. Then married a younger woman. She paused. That woman didn't get pregnant either. 3 wives later, he finally agreed to get tested. Turned out he had severe male factor infertility. All those years, all those women he destroyed, and the problem was his all along. The implications hung in the air. You think, Chick. Gozi couldn't finish the sentence. I don't know. But I think you deserve answers that aren't based on assumptions and male pride. Over the next month, Dr. Amara ran every test imaginable. Blood work, hormonal panels, ultrasounds, genetic screening. The process was thorough and occasionally uncomfortable, but Gozi endured it all. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon. Gozi, Dr. Amara said, her face serious but not sad, there's nothing wrong with you. Gozi felt the words like a physical blow. What? Your ovarian reserve is excellent. Your hormones are balanced. Your reproductive system is completely healthy. In fact, based on these results, you should have no problem conceiving with the right partner. The room seemed to tilt. But we tried for 5 years. 5 years and nothing happened. Which suggests the issue was likely with Chick, not you. Male factor infertility is responsible for about 40% of all fertility issues, but men are often the last to get tested because of pride and societal assumptions. Gozi sat in stunned silence, processing this information. 5 years of blame, of shame, of being labeled barren, of her marriage ending, of public humiliation, all potentially based on a lie. Are you certain? She whispered. As certain as medical science allows. Gozi, I believe you can have children. I believe you could have had them with Chick if he'd been willing to address his own issues. But he wasn't. And that's not your failure, it's his. Something broke open in Gozi's chest. Not the painful breaking of the past months, but something else. Something that felt like freedom. She cried in that doctor's office, deep, gasping sobs that released years of accumulated pain. Dr. Amara held her hand through it all. When the tears finally subsided, Dr. Amara said, Now, I want to propose something. And I want you to think carefully before answering. What? Have you considered intrauterine insemination with donor sperm? Gozi blinked. No. I've never. You're only 36. You're healthy. You're fertile. You deserve to be a mother if that's what you want. It doesn't have to happen within a traditional marriage. Modern medicine offers options. The idea was radical, scandalous, even in conservative Nigerian society. An unmarried woman choosing to have a child through medical intervention? The gossip alone would be brutal. But as Gozi sat there, she realized something. She'd already survived the worst the society could throw at her. What did she have left to lose? How much does it cost? She asked. More than you currently have, Dr. Amara admitted. But I have a proposition. I'm starting a new initiative, fertility services for women who've been unjustly blamed for reproductive issues. You'd be my first patient. I can't do it completely free, but I can make it affordable. And there's something else. What? Given your health profile, I'd recommend IUI with multiple follicles. There's a good chance you could conceive multiples, twins, possibly even triplets. Multiples. The word seemed to echo with irony and justice. Over the next 2 months, while continuing her small food business, Gozi underwent the IUI procedure. Dr. Amara walked her through every step, answered every question, held her hand through the nervousness and hope and fear. 2 weeks after the procedure, Gozi took a pregnancy test. Positive. She didn't believe it. Took 3 more tests. All positive. The ultrasound 3 weeks later revealed the unbelievable truth. She was pregnant with triplets. 3 healthy embryos, all developing perfectly. Gozi sat in that examination room, staring at the ultrasound screen showing 3 tiny heartbeats, and felt a joy so profound it seemed to rewire her entire being. She was going to be a mother. Not despite Chick, but without him. Not as a validation of her worth, but as a gift to herself. Pregnancy changed everything and nothing. Gozi's body swelled with new life, 3 lives, actually, while her mind remained sharply focused on survival. Being pregnant with triplets while poor and alone was not the fairy tale version of expectant motherhood. It was exhausting, terrifying, and demanding in ways she'd never anticipated. But Gozi had learned something crucial during her darkest months. She was stronger than she'd ever known. The pregnancy, surprisingly, didn't slow down her food business. If anything, it motivated her to work harder. She knew that in a few months, she'd have 3 infants depending entirely on her. There was no time for self-pity or fear. Her neighbor, Mrs. Adebayo, became her unofficial business partner and grandmother figure. "You can't be standing in the sun selling food while carrying 3 babies," the older woman scolded. "I'll sell for you. You focus on cooking and staying healthy." Other neighbors joined in. Mrs. Ibrahim, who lived upstairs, helped with packaging. Young Emeka, the university student next door, delivered orders on his motorcycle for a small fee. The community that Gozi had initially seen as a step down from her former life became her support system. But the real transformation came through an unexpected connection. One of her regular customers was a man named Femi, an IT entrepreneur who ran a mid-sized tech company. He always ordered 3 portions, 1 for himself and 2 for his business partners. "This soup reminds me of my grandmother's cooking," he told Gozi one day. "You know, you could scale this. Really scale it." "What do you mean?" Food delivery apps are booming in Abuja. But most of the options are the same boring fast food. You're offering something different, authentic, homemade quality. If you had an online presence, proper packaging, reliable delivery, you could reach 10 times your current customer base. Gozi laughed, though not unkindly. "I can barely keep up with the customers I have now. I'm cooking in a shared kitchen with 2 burners. Scale is a dream I can't afford." Femi considered this. "What if I invested in you?" "What?" "I'm serious. I invest in startups all the time. Usually tech companies, but food is always going to be relevant. Give me a business plan, show me you're serious, and I'll provide capital for equipment, licensing, packaging, and a basic delivery infrastructure." It seemed too good to be true. Gozi's experiences had taught her to be suspicious of men offering help with no apparent strings attached. "What would you want in return?" she asked carefully. 20% equity in the business. That's it. I'm not trying to control it or take over. I just see potential, and I want to be part of something that could work. Gozi thought about it for days. She consulted Dr. Amara, who had become not just her doctor but a trusted friend and mentor. "Do your research on him," Dr. Amara advised. "Make sure he's legitimate. But if he is, this could be the opportunity you need. Just make sure everything is properly documented and legal." Femi turned out to be exactly what he claimed, a successful businessman with a track record of smart investments and no apparent ulterior motives. His company checked out. His references were solid. They formalized the partnership with proper legal contracts. Femi invested 5 million naira to start. With that capital, Gozi transformed her operation. She rented a small commercial kitchen space. She bought proper cooking equipment, industrial burners, large pots, commercial refrigeration. She designed professional packaging with her brand name, Mama's Pot, a tribute to her mother's cooking lessons. She hired 2 assistants to help with cooking. She partnered with bike delivery services. She created social media accounts and paid for targeted advertising. Mama's Pot. Homemade traditional soups delivered to your office. Taste home away from home. The response was overwhelming. Within 3 months, Mama's Pot was delivering 200 meals per day. Within 6 months, 500. The demand was so high that Gozi had to hire more staff and rent a larger kitchen. All while 6 months pregnant with triplets. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been divorced for being barren, and now she was building a successful business while carrying 3 children. Dr. Amara monitored her pregnancy closely. Triplet pregnancies were high risk, especially for a first-time mother. But Gozi was healthy, followed every medical instruction, and somehow managed the stress of rapid business expansion without major complications. Femi proved to be a dream business partner. He handled the tech side, building a website, creating an app for orders, setting up digital payment systems. He provided business advice when asked but never overstepped. He respected Gozi's vision and leadership. "You have something special," he told her during one of their planning meetings. "Not just a good product, but a good story. People love that you're building this from nothing, that you're turning adversity into success." Gozi bristled slightly at that. "I don't want to sell my pain. I'm not suggesting you do. I'm just saying that authenticity resonates. The fact that you cook with care because you know what it's like to be hungry, that comes through in the food." By her 7th month of pregnancy, Mama's Pot had expanded to 3 locations, employed 15 people, and was generating revenues that Gozi could barely believe. She wasn't rich, not remotely close to Chick's level of wealth, but she was stable. More than stable. She was successful. She moved out of the single room in Nyanya to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Guarimpa. Nothing fancy, but clean, safe, with enough space for her and the babies that would soon arrive. She furnished it simply but carefully. A comfortable bed. A nursery with 3 cribs. Basic appliances. Everything she needed, nothing she didn't. The triplets were born in her 8th month, a planned C-section due to the complications of multiple pregnancy. 3 boys, healthy and perfect, weighing just over 2 kilograms each. Chinidu, Chukwamika, and Chisholm. She named them after her father's father, her own father, and the concept of God's guidance, Chisom, meaning, God follows me. The medical bills would have bankrupted her a year ago. But now, with her business thriving and Dr. Amara providing care at a steep discount, Gozi managed. The first night home with her 3 sons, exhausted beyond measure, Gozi sat in her small living room and simply marveled. These 3 tiny humans, sleeping in their Moses baskets, were hers. Completely hers. No one could take them away. No one could use them as weapons against her. No one could claim she was less than because she'd failed to produce them. She had done this. She had survived the worst and created something beautiful. Mrs. Adebayo helped with the babies during the day so Gozi could continue managing Mama's Pot from home. She hired a house help named Peace, a young woman from her home state who was reliable and gentle with the children. The business continued to grow. By the time the triplets were 6 months old, Mama's Pot had expanded to 5 locations across Abuja. Femi was already talking about franchising, about expanding to Lagos, about turning this into a national brand. Gozi was cautious but open to possibilities. She reinvested most of her profits back into the business, living modestly even as revenues climbed. And then, about a year after the triplets were born, as Gozi was reviewing the day's receipts in her small home office, her phone buzzed with a notification. A friend request on Facebook from someone named Chidera Okonkwo, Chick's fiancé. Gozi's first instinct was to decline. She'd worked hard to put that part of her life behind her. She hadn't thought about Chick in months, hadn't checked his social media, hadn't kept track of his life. But curiosity won out. She accepted the request and scrolled through Chidera's profile. The wedding was set for 3 months from now. The preparations were elaborate. daily posts about dress fittings, venue decoration planning, honeymoon destinations. It was exactly the kind of ostentatious display Gozy would have expected. Then she saw it, a tagged photo from Chick's account. The wedding invitation. An ornate, gold-leafed monstrosity that probably cost more than Gozy used to make in a month. And then, a few scrolls down, a post from Chick himself. Inviting all our loved ones, even those from our past, to witness our blessed union. Because we are secure in our love and our future. The comments section was filled with speculation. Several people had noticed that Chick had sent an invitation to his ex-wife. "Why would you invite her?" one comment asked. "To show her what she lost," another replied. "This is savage," wrote a third. "Inviting your poor ex to your rich wedding. Brutal." The intent was clear. This wasn't about graciousness or closure. This was about humiliation. About rubbing Gozy's face in his continued success and her perceived failure. For a moment, Gozy felt the old pain flicker. The old shame. Then she looked across the room at her 3 sons, now 15 months old, playing with blocks on the floor. She thought about her business, about the life she'd built from absolute nothing, about the strength she'd discovered within herself. And she smiled. An invitation had arrived at her apartment the next day, delivered by a courier in a luxury box, dripping with expensive symbolism. Mrs. Adebayo, who'd accepted the delivery, brought it to her with raised eyebrows. "This is from your ex-husband?" "Yes." "You're not going to this nonsense, are you?" Gozy opened the invitation, read the elaborate wording, felt the expensive cardstock between her fingers. "Actually," she said slowly, a plan forming in her mind, "I think I am." "Why would you do that to yourself?" "Because," Gozy replied, her smile widening, "I think Chick needs to see something." The morning of the wedding, Gozy woke at 5 a.m., not unusual for a mother of triplets, but this time it wasn't the babies who'd woken her. It was anticipation. She'd spent the past 3 months preparing for this day with the same meticulous care she applied to her business. This wasn't about revenge, exactly. It was about truth. About showing up as her authentic self and letting Chick confront the reality of what he'd thrown away. Dr. Amara had insisted on helping. "I'm coming with you," she'd declared. "And I'm bringing my sister. You need support, and those babies need handlers." Gozy had protested at first, but Dr. Amara was insistent. "Besides," she'd added with a mischievous smile, "I want to see Chick's face when you walk in. Consider it part of my healing process, too." The dress had been chosen carefully. Not a cheap knockoff trying to look expensive, but a genuinely beautiful traditional agbada in royal purple and gold, custom-made by a talented designer who owed Mama's pot a favor after Gozy had catered his daughter's naming ceremony at cost. The gold jewelry was rented. No point in pretending she had that kind of money to waste on accessories. But it was real gold, and it looked stunning against her skin. Her hair had been done the previous day, her gelly wrapped by an expert who'd made it look like a crown without trying too hard. But the real preparation had been different. The Rolls-Royce. Femi had balked when she'd first proposed the idea. "You want to rent a Rolls-Royce for 1 day?" he'd asked incredulously. "Gozy, that's going to cost at least 500,000 naira, possibly more. It's wasteful." "It's an investment," she'd replied calmly. "In my mental health and in making a point that needs to be made." "What point?" "That success isn't measured by who you marry or who discards you. It's measured by what you build from the ashes." Femi had stared at her for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "You know what? Do it. In fact, I'll cover half the cost. This I have to see." The rental company had been accommodating once Gozy had paid the deposit. They provided not just the car, but a professional chauffeur trained in handling high-end vehicles and high-profile clients. Now, at 11 a.m., 3 hours before the wedding ceremony was scheduled to start, Gozy stood in her modest apartment and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked good. Not in the desperate, trying too hard way. Just genuinely good. Healthy. Confident. Alive. The triplets, dressed in matching white traditional outfits with tiny caps, were surprisingly well behaved, as if they sensed this was an important day. At 15 months, they were at that perfect age. Old enough to be somewhat manageable, young enough to be impossibly cute. "You ready for this?" Dr. Amara asked, adjusting Chinidu's cap. "I have no idea," Gozi admitted. "But I'm doing it anyway." The drive from Guarimpa to the Transcorp Hilton in Abuja took 20 minutes. Every second of it felt surreal. Gozi sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce, holding Chukwemeka, while Dr. Amara and her sister Ngozi managed the other two boys. "Remember," Dr. Amara said as they approached the hotel, "you don't owe anyone explanations. You walk in, you stay for a polite amount of time, you leave. That's it." But Gozi knew it wouldn't be that simple. The Rolls-Royce pulled up to the hotel entrance at exactly 2:15 p.m., 15 minutes after the ceremony was supposed to have started. Gozi had timed this deliberately. She didn't want to arrive early and have to make small talk. She wanted to arrive when her entrance would be noticed. The chauffeur opened her door with practiced precision. And Gozi stepped out into the Abuja afternoon sun, her sons in her arms and at her sides, and walked toward the destiny she'd chosen for herself. The murmurs started immediately. Gozi could hear them rippling through the crowd of guests still lingering in the hotel lobby. "Is that Chick's ex-wife? Look at those children. Triplets. How did she afford a Rolls-Royce?" She walked past them all with her head high, her expression serene. She'd learned something important during her time in the wilderness. Other people's opinions couldn't hurt her unless she gave them power. The ballroom doors were open. The ceremony hadn't started yet. In typical Nigerian wedding fashion, they were running late. Guests milled about, admiring the decorations, gossiping, networking. Gozi walked in. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The music seemed to dim. And there, at the altar, standing next to a visibly irritated pastor, was Chick. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Gozi saw it all play across his face in rapid succession. Recognition, shock, confusion, disbelief, and then, most satisfying of all, fear. She didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Simply held his gaze for a long moment, then gracefully made her way to a seat in the middle section. The whispers exploded around her. "Those are her children. Triplets. After he divorced her for being barren. How is that possible? Where did she get the money for that car? She looks amazing." Chick stood frozen at the altar. His best man was whispering urgently in his ear, probably asking if he was okay. The pastor looked confused and impatient. In the bridal suite, someone must have informed Chidera of Gozi's arrival, because Gozi could hear raised voices even from where she sat. Dr. Amara leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" Gozi nodded. She was more than okay. She felt powerful in a way she'd never experienced during her marriage. Back then, her identity had been tied to Chick's approval, Chick's success, Chick's family's acceptance. No. She was her own person. These boys were hers. Her business was hers. Her life was hers. Chick couldn't take any of that away. The ceremony finally began, almost 30 minutes late. Chidera appeared, looking stunning in a dress that probably cost more than a luxury car, but Gozi noticed her eyes kept darting toward where Gozi sat. The wedding proceeded with all the expected pomp. The exchange of vows. The prayers. The elaborate traditional ceremonies. The couple's dance. The cutting of the absurdly large cake. Through it all, Gozi sat calmly, her boys remarkably well behaved in her and Dr. Amara's care. She smiled politely when people glanced her way. She clapped when appropriate. She gave no one any ammunition to call her bitter or vengeful. But she could feel the shift in the room, could sense the questions multiplying, the narrative changing. During the reception, as guests mingled and ate, several people approached Gozi. Some were genuinely kind. "You look wonderful, Gozi. How have you been?" Some were fishing for gossip. "So those are your children? How old are they? Where's their father?" Gozi answered politely but minimally. "I've been well, thank you. My sons are 15 months old. I'm raising them myself." One bold woman, a friend of Chick's mother, had the audacity to ask, "So you weren't really barren after all? How did that happen?" Gozi looked at her evenly. "Turns out I was never the problem." The implication hung in the air. The woman's eyes widened. "You mean?" "I mean," Gozi said clearly, "that medical issues are complex, and blame is often assigned too quickly and to the wrong person." Word spread like wildfire. Within an hour, half the wedding guests were speculating about Chick's fertility. The other half were marveling at Gozi's apparent success and transformation. Chick tried to maintain his composure, but Gozi could see the cracks. He drank more than he should have. He smiled too widely. He laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't that funny. Chitara looked increasingly agitated, snapping at vendors and glaring at guests who stared too long at Gozi. It was Chick's mother who finally confronted Gozi. The older woman materialized beside Gozi's table, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "You have some nerve showing up here," she hissed. "I was invited," Gozi replied calmly. "Those children, who is their father? That's none of your business. You're trying to ruin my son's wedding." "I'm sitting quietly, minding my business. If the wedding is being ruined, perhaps you should examine why my mere presence has that effect." Mrs. Okonkwo's face flushed red. "You were always selfish. Always." "Excuse me," Dr. Amara interrupted, standing up. "Is there a problem here?" Mrs. Okonkwo looked at Dr. Amara, seemed to recognize that making a scene would only make things worse, and stormed off. "That went well," Dr. Amara said dryly. Gozi laughed, a genuine, free laugh. "I should probably leave soon." "Probably. You've made your point." But before Gozi could gather her things, Chick himself approached. He looked awful up close. Despite the expensive tuxedo and grooming, there was something haunted in his eyes. "Gozi," he said, his voice low, "can we talk? Privately." "I don't think that's appropriate, Chick. This is your wedding day. Please. Just 5 minutes." Against her better judgment, Gozi agreed. Dr. Amara gave her a warning look but nodded, gathering the triplets to give them space. Chick led her to a quiet corner of the terrace overlooking Abuja's skyline. "Those children," he started. "Are they?" "No," Gozi said firmly. "They are not yours. I had them through IUI with donor sperm." The relief and disappointment warred on Chick's face. "So you weren't. The problem wasn't." "No, Chick. The problem wasn't me. I'm perfectly fertile. I always was." He looked like he might be sick. "But we tried for 5 years." "You tried. I begged you to get tested with me. You refused. You were so certain the problem was mine that you destroyed our marriage over it." "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." Silence. In the distance, they could hear the wedding celebration continuing, music and laughter that now seemed hollow. "You look good," Chick said finally. "Successful. How did you?" "I started a food business. It grew. I worked hard. I didn't wait for someone to save me or validate me. I saved myself. And the Rolls-Royce?" Gozi smiled. "Rented. For today. Because I wanted you to see that I didn't collapse without you. That I built something real from nothing. Not to hurt you, Chick, but to free myself from the narrative you created about me. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Gozi. I was cruel. I was wrong. I blamed you for my own fears and insecurities. It was the apology she'd once dreamed of hearing. But now, standing here, she realized it didn't change anything. Didn't undo the pain. Didn't rewrite the past. I appreciate the apology, she said gently. But it doesn't matter anymore. You're married now. Start fresh. Be better to Chidera than you were to me. I don't love her, Chick blurted out. Not like I loved you. Gozi felt a flicker of pity. Then you shouldn't have married her. But that's your choice to live with, not mine. She turned to leave. Gozi, wait. Goodbye, Chick. Congratulations on your wedding. She walked away from him for the second time in her life. But this time, it was on her own terms. This time, she was walking toward something instead of away from everything. Dr. Amara was waiting with the boys, ready to go. They made their way out of the ballroom, past the staring guests, through the lobby, and back to the Rolls-Royce. As the car pulled away from the hotel, Gozi looked back one last time at the gleaming building where Chick's wedding continued without her. And she felt nothing. No anger. No vindication. No regret. Just peace. 6 months after the wedding, Gozi sat in her new office, the corporate headquarters of Mama's Pot, which now operated 20 locations across 3 cities. The business had exploded after the wedding. Not because she'd marketed her appearance there, she hadn't, but because people talk. The story spread. The supposedly barren ex-wife who'd built a successful business while raising triplets, who'd shown up to her ex's wedding in a Rolls-Royce and walked away with dignity. It became a story of resilience that resonated with women across Nigeria. Mama's Pot became more than a food delivery service. It became a symbol of female empowerment, of rising from ashes, of refusing to be defined by someone else's narrative. Revenue had tripled. Femi was now talking about a multi-million-dollar investment round to expand nationally. Gozi was being invited to speak at business conferences and women's empowerment events. But the most significant development wasn't professional. Chick and Chidera had separated. Gozi heard it through the grapevine, confirmed by gossip blogs that had once delighted in her humiliation and now tracked Chick's downfall with equal relish. Chidera had left him 3 months after the wedding. No children, no patience for a man whose ego had crumbled after Gozi's appearance at their wedding. The separation revealed something that made the blogs go wild. Chick had secretly gotten tested after seeing Gozi's triplets. The results confirmed what Gozi had known. Chick had severe male factor infertility. Treatable, possibly, but untreated all those years he'd blamed her. The public revelation was brutal. The same society that had mocked Gozi now turned on Chick with equal venom. Barren husband projects onto wife, one headline read. Another, billionaire's pride more important than truth. Gozi didn't gloat. She issued one statement through her business's social media. I hope everyone involved finds peace and healing. Infertility is a difficult journey for anyone experiencing it, regardless of gender. Compassion should always come before judgment. It was gracious. It was dignified. And it made people respect her even more. Chick tried to contact her several times after his separation. Calls, messages, even showing up at one of her restaurant locations. She never responded. There was nothing left to say. She'd said it all on that terrace during his wedding. Goodbye. On a Saturday morning, almost a year after that fateful wedding, Gozi took her 3 sons to the park. They were walking now, toddling around with the enthusiastic instability of 2-year-olds, discovering the world with wonder and joy. She pushed them on swings, helped them navigate the slide, shared snacks and juice boxes. Mrs. Adebayo had come along, bringing her own grandchildren. Dr. Amara had joined them, needing a break from the hospital. Peace, the house help who'd become like family, managed the diaper bag and extra clothes. They were a community. Not a traditional family, but something just as valuable. As Gozi watched Chinedu carefully share his crackers with Chukwuemeka, as Chisholm laughed at a butterfly landing on his hand, she felt a completeness she'd never experienced during her marriage. This was enough. More than enough. This was everything. You did it, Dr. Amara said, sitting beside her on the bench. You really did it. You built a beautiful life from nothing. Gozi smiled, watching her sons play. We did it. I couldn't have done this alone. Maybe. But you had the courage to start. To choose yourself when everyone said you were worthless. That's rare. Gozi's phone buzzed. A message from Femi. Investor meeting confirmed for Tuesday. They're offering 50 million. We did it, partner. She showed Dr. Amara, who whooped with joy. Life was good. Not perfect. Raising triplets alone while running a rapidly expanding business was exhausting. There were hard days, lonely nights, moments of doubt. But it was hers. Authentically, completely hers. That night, after the boys were in bed, Gozi stood by their cribs and whispered to them. You were supposed to be my shame. That's what your father thought. That's what his family thought. That's what society thought, that I was less than because you didn't exist. She touched each of their sleeping heads gently. But you are my greatest joy. My proudest achievement. Not because you validate me or prove something to anyone else, but because you are loved, wanted, chosen. In the darkness of the nursery, with only a nightlight casting soft shadows, Gozi made a promise to her sons and to herself. We will never let anyone's narrative define us. We will write our own story. And it will be beautiful. And it was. Chikezi's wedding was supposed to be his moment of triumph. Instead, it became a mirror reflecting all his choices back at him. He'd thought inviting Gozi would humiliate her, prove his superiority, validate his decision to leave. Instead, her presence revealed the truth he'd been running from, that pride destroys more than infertility ever could. Gozi's story isn't about revenge. It's about redemption, not in the eyes of others, but in her own eyes. She didn't show up to that wedding to hurt Chick. She showed up to show herself that she'd survived. That she'd thrived. That the woman he'd discarded was stronger than the man who'd thrown her away. In Nigerian society, where women are often judged by their marital status and fertility, where divorce carries shame and childlessness carries stigma, Gozi's transformation represents something revolutionary. The idea that a woman's worth is not determined by her relationship to a man or her ability to produce children on demand. She found her worth in herself, in her resilience, in her ability to create life, both literal children and a metaphorical business, from nothing. Chick's tragedy wasn't his infertility. It was his pride. His refusal to face his own vulnerabilities. His need to blame someone else for what he perceived as failure. And in the end, that pride cost him everything. A wife who truly loved him, the respect of society, his own peace of mind. Some might say Gozi got her revenge. But those people miss the point. Gozi got her freedom. And that's worth more than any revenge could ever be. Was Gozi's presence at the wedding suite revenge? Or was it something deeper? A woman reclaiming her narrative and refusing to be defined by someone else's cruelty? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, your worth is not determined by who leaves you. It's determined by what you build when you're left behind.